Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of 1988's Without a Clue, the first Sherlock Holmes film review in my Sherlock season. Starring Michael Caine as Holmes and Ben Kingsley as Watson, it may seem like an odd choice if you've seen the film, as it's a parody rather than an adaptation. But it's the first Holmes film I have a clear memory of watching. Before the age of streaming and multi-channel TV, it was a lot harder to find Sherlock Holmes films to watch, and as a child I had very little access to home video, so I gravitated towards this Holmes film, without a clue as to what it was about. I knew it was a comedy, having seen a TV trailer for it, but that was about all I knew. As it turns out, the film was a failure on initial release, which was nothing new for Sherlock Holmes spoofs, and is a trend that has continued to this day. From The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother, to the Peter Cook Dudley Moore Hound of the Baskervilles, to the more recent Holmes and Watson. All have failed to live up to the talent involved in making these films. Without a Clue, commercially and critically, also falls in with this group. However, I think the difference is that Without a Clue has gained a following that the others haven't. I think this comes down to two things. The first is that the core story, the mystery, is actually very good, and would stand up if the film had been made as a straight pastiche rather than a parody. The second thing is that if you were making a Sherlock Holmes comedy, there's really only one joke that most viewers will get. Holmes makes a long and detailed deduction, only for a character to tell him he's wrong.
No power connection. Tiny little scuff marks around the edge of it. Every night he goes to plug in to charge, but his hands are shaking. You'll never see those marks on a sober man's phone. Never see a drunk's without them.
Good Lord, that's remarkable. And completely wrong.
What?
Because everyone knows the character, but no one knows the character that well, any jokes you might make about the character or stories will be quite niche, as to not be understood by a general audience. Without a Clue understands this, and gets around it by tweaking the basic formula just enough so that it remains recognisable and can have fun with the characters. How it achieves this is by suggesting that the real genius is Dr. Watson, who has all the skills we expect of Holmes, but in order to maintain his reputation as a doctor, created the character of Sherlock Holmes as a cover to allow him to be a doctor and detective.
At the time, I was hoping for an appointment to the staff of a rather conservative medical college. I knew that they'd frown on my little hobby. Exactly.
However, it was eventually necessary to have an actual Sherlock Holmes, as the public demanded to meet him, so Watson employed failed actor Reginald Kincaid.
Harris in the Daily Telegram said, "In an otherwise dismal evening, Reginald Kincaid provided some welcome laughs,"
to play him. The problem with this is that Kincaid is an arrogant, egotistical, vice-filled buffoon. Kincaid as Holmes is the only character that is out-and-out clownish. A lot of the supporting cast are presented as idiots, or at the very least so blinded by the hero worship of Holmes they are unable to see through his sometimes thin veneer as Holmes, but aren't buffoonish or clownish in any way. Most importantly is that Watson is played relatively straight, and the villains are played relatively straight. This is a formula that works much better than when every character is clownish, because if every character is a clown, then no character is a clown, as there is no room for contrast. On to the film itself. It opens fairly straight, with a reworking of the end of the Red-Headed League, as Holmes and Watson capture John Clay and his accomplice, aided by the police. It is only after the police leave that we are given a hint that something is amiss.
You idiot! What? Confound you!
What did I say?
Before we transition to the opening credits. These credits are beautifully done, as coloured lithographs of our two stars and scenes of Victorian London play behind the credits, as if they're pages in an old newspaper, before it transitions back to Holmes and Watson. It sets the scene perfectly, and establishes this is period Holmes, but not as we know it. This is further highlighted as Watson continues to chastise Holmes for declaring the case to be closed without Watson's approval. Now, we don't know exactly what's going on at this point in the story, but we can infer that this version of Watson is the one in charge. However, Holmes quickly demonstrates to an assembled crowd of journalists outside Baker Street that he is not a complete fool, using his own talents as an actor to embarrass a reporter who questions his methods.
Describe the front of this building.
It's brick.
Yes.
It's got black railings, I think.
That's right.
And windows.
How many windows?
How many?
Quite so. He sees, but he does not observe.
This is perhaps where a small crack in the character narrative appears, as we can clearly see that Kincaid is a convincing performer, but his failure as an actor is portrayed as him being terrible at it, not just being unlucky. It's not a huge issue, but it isn't easy to believe he is a bad actor when he is really good at pretending to be Sherlock Holmes. When inside, Watson gets Holmes to admit the act was a con and tries to demonstrate how his deductive reasoning methods work, but Holmes is entirely disinterested. What's interesting about this is that it's not simply a role reversal. In the original stories, Watson is not as observant or astute as Holmes, but he is deeply fascinated by Holmes's skill and wants to learn for himself. Here, Watson is the one using deductive reasoning and observation, but because he and Holmes aren't really friends, there is no familiar relationship between them, and so Kincaid doesn't care. Fed up with Kincaid's loutish behaviour, Watson fires him, much to the relief of this film's Mrs. Hudson, who is in on the secret but despises Kincaid.
He's been at it again.
I never liked that woman.
Come in, Mrs. Hudson.
I found it under a loose board in the stairwell.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
Planning to go it alone as the crime doctor, no longer concerned with his public image as a respectable doctor, as he reveals to the chagrin of the publisher of The Strand.
An actor! Nothing the matter. Nothing at all. Back to work.
Played by Peter Cook, who, of course, himself had appeared as Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles a decade earlier. Watson is a much more well-developed character in this film than in most adaptations, and is lucky enough to have a character arc. While the film does rely on some set pieces and gags for humour,
Hello? What have we here?
Something's afoot.
How many times have I told you to stay away from my experiments?
Something wrong?
it also tells a story that the jokes don't get in the way of. A perfect example of this is how Watson struggles to be taken seriously without Holmes, and so has to re-employ him in order to continue solving crimes.
I happen to know that you recently recovered from an illness. That you smoke a pipe. Probably rosewood. And you spent time in China.
Sorry, Doctor. This is no time for parlour games.
That I can tell you recently recovered from an illness, smoke a pipe, probably rosewood, and have spent some time in China.
Amazing!
I mean, this is a commonly used joke framework that is perfectly employed within the story to demonstrate why Watson isn't able to just go it alone. He needs Holmes, so it makes sense why they spend the rest of the plot together. While I think a lot of the jokes land really well and are delivered really well, some of the jokes do fall flat. There's no denying that. There's a running joke with a dog that keeps harassing Holmes about halfway through the film, when the pair check into a hotel in Windermere in the Lake District. It doesn't work for a few reasons. The first being that the running gag is only for a few scenes in quick succession. Secondly, it's not particularly well shot to work as a gag. And thirdly, the punchline of this running gag is also not delivered well in how it's staged. Had they set up the fact that random dogs jump at Holmes 2 or 3 times earlier on in the script, then had the dog in the hotel come out of nowhere when Holmes first enters, then set up the dog as being asleep in Holmes' room when this scene comes to a climax, its appearance as a punchline would have worked much better. You could even add to the joke by calling the Hotel Baskerville, and after Holmes is attacked for the last time, Watson could comment that it gives him an idea for a story. By contrast, there's a great joke just after this scene, where Watson reveals that Moriarty is behind this mystery, which terrifies Holmes, until Watson reveals that Moriarty knows their secret, that Watson is really the brains.
Moriarty!
Oh, for God's sake!
You didn't tell me that homicidal maniac was involved in this.
Moriarty knows. I'm the only match for his evil genius.
Are you sure he's not trying to kill me?
Of course not. He knows you're an idiot.
Thank God.
It's perfectly played by both actors and perfectly shot to underplay the joke. Caine and Kingsley have really excellent chemistry, and even though neither actor was particularly known for comedy at the time, they're both more than capable. Caine, having a little more experience in comedy, is able to play the physical comedy with ease, while Kingsley, playing it fairly straight, is the perfect foil. Which is lucky when you consider this is very much a two-hander, and the film rests on their shoulders. I really like that the trip to the Lake District is mostly story-driven, with a few humorous moments, rather than an excuse for humorous set pieces in that location. Although it's a little disappointing that the film doesn't spend more time here, as it's such a fabulous location. Spoilers ahead from here on out, so you have been warned. As the film builds to its climax, Holmes is allowed his own character arc as he manages to put together the clues that lead him to Moriarty. Watson is out of the picture at this point, and while it's possible the film could have suffered from the breaking up of the core double act, this acts as Holmes' lowest point, where he is forced to work alone because there are genuine stakes in place now, and he is fully aware of them, rather than simply following Watson's script. This manages to make him a more well-rounded character, while retaining enough of his buffoonishness to be entertaining as the film builds to its climax. The climax itself doesn't fall into farce, but still manages to keep the fun of the rest of the film while taking the stakes and the humour up a notch, which is quite the balancing act, but I think it succeeds and even gives Holmes a hero moment as he uses his stage combat skills to battle Moriarty before undercutting his deductive achievement with one last gag.
Child's play.
23rd Psalm.
Shadow of Death.
Elementary.
No, I was referring to the serial number. 234. The address of the theatre. 234 Beacon Street.
This gag plays into the early Sherlock joke I mentioned, but by this point in the story, the film has entirely earned it. There's a touching epilogue which brings the story full circle, but with a genuine friendship having been formed between the two characters that completes these heroes' journey. I really enjoy this film, despite its flaws, for several reasons. As I've mentioned, the chemistry between the two leads is perfect, the mystery is clever, and the humour mostly works. In addition to that, though, it's shot beautifully. The off-season Lake District looks moody and evocative of mystery and suspense, despite the film not spending much time there. The scenes in London look atmospherically Victorian, with grimy streets and inviting interiors framed and lit perfectly for the tone. The score is jaunty and light and helps to set a tone for a mystery comedy, although it does become a little repetitive in places. And for the most part, the rest of the performances in the film are great, with the only exception being the landlady of the hotel in the Lake District, who is perhaps a little too broad.
Oh, Mr. Holmes! We're all so proud to have you here.
Some of the jokes fall flat because of the way they're staged, and some fall flat because they don't quite fit the tone of the rest of the film. The main culprit for this being a big spoiler, so please look away now if you haven't seen the film. The character of Leslie Giles, played by Lizette Anthony, is revealed to be an imposter working for Moriarty, and the real Leslie is revealed to be a cross-dressing man, which is hinted at earlier in the film, but this plot point is entirely for the purpose of one fairly unnecessary reveal gag that feels out of place, corny and unneeded. It doesn't ruin the film, but the film would be better without it. Thank you. Goodbye.